Okay, welcome back. Unfortunately, I believe at this point we should continue our seminar and the lecture, most of all, here on Zoom. Maybe, Maya, if you have time, just notify people of Facebook that we are moving to Zoom unless we'll be able to solve this problem meanwhile, but there's literally no point in waiting further. We have some unexpected technical problems, which are quite surprising because we do it on a regular basis and we never encountered them, for which I'm terribly sorry, but for us here on Zoom, it should be okay. Barring this unfortunate event, I would like to welcome Professor Joannę Lam from the University of Copenhagen, who was kind enough to accept our invitation to give this lecture on international investment law and the green energy transition. We are most happy of this, especially so because Professor Lam is a world-renowned expert in both trade law and international investment and international investment arbitration law, and author of numerous publications on the matter, and an authority from whom we would gladly to hear. And also, accidentally, Professor is the director of the SHIELD, which is the study hub for international economic law and development, in which she deals precisely with the subject she's going to discuss today. So without further ado, once more, I welcome Professor and everybody who managed to come here despite our technical difficulties on Facebook on behalf of our working group for biodiversity and climate. And Professor, I would like to invite you to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those very kind words and the great introduction. And I also would like to say that it's such a great pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure because I think that it's such a great initiative. I've been following the climate group research group at the Faculty of Law and Administration at the University of Warsaw for quite a while. I just wanted to congratulate you very warmly on this absolutely fantastic initiative. I think that it's been so energetically driven. It's so timely. I'm honored, and it's really great to be here with you and to have this opportunity to meet both the researchers and the students engaged in this initiative. I've been asked to deliver a lecture in English, considering the fact that there might be participants who are non-Polish speaking ones. That's why I will continue in English, but if you allow, I just would like to say a few words in Polish to all the Polish participants. To wielka przyjemność Państwa powitać i poznać. Bardzo się cieszę, że mam tę okazję, żeby się z Państwem spotkać. Chciałam dodać, że jest to dla mnie też osobista przyjemność, ponieważ jestem absolwentką Wydziału Prawa i Administracji Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego. Jest to w pewnym sensie dla mnie powrót przy tak miłej okazji. Bardzo się cieszę, że mam tę możliwość. Serdecznie Państwu dziękuję za zaproszenie. And now, if I could return to my main task, I would like to get started with sharing the screen and with the presentation. I just would like to confirm that it's visible. Thank you so much. So the topic of my today's presentation and the lecture is that of international investment law and the green energy transition. And international investment law is a well-established discipline. It's a well-established legal field that deals with the issues of regulation of international investments that are placed in different host countries. So it covers the problems related to regulatory framework for such actions, for those types of legal relations. And many of them actually deal or have as a subject the energy sector. Hence, the problem of the green transition and the challenges that are related to it are, of course, immediately affecting the investment side of that. So the legal regulations that cope with international investment law do have to react or do have to encompass the problems that we face as the global challenge of this big transformation that the energy sector basically worldwide has to deal with. So in my lecture, I would like to cover several topics. So I understand that not everybody in the room is specializes in investment law. So I would like to start with a very brief characterization of the main features of this field of the law and its structural and historical characteristics. To further move to the point related directly to the protection of environmental common goods in international investment law as we have it right now. So I would like to take a look with you at the status quo of the existing regulations in the field of international investments in order to consider or think or reflect on how the protection of environmental common goods, including those related to the energy sector, can be solved. And then the next point that I would like to address is that of the green transition itself. So what challenges and what prospects do we face when we approach it from the point of view of international investment law? Furthermore, I would like to focus on one of the possible instruments that can be used in order to give a boost or to support the green transition through international investment law, and this is the introduction of substantive investor obligations. So I would like to comment a little bit on the present state of the art of the field. And how it can be changed, and what could be done, and what might be really difficult to be achieved. And finally, if time allows, I would like to say a few words about what we're doing in SHIELD, so in the research group that was so kindly introduced by Dr. Marcisz, the study hub for international economic law and development that I have a great pleasure to lead at the University of Copenhagen. So if we get started with the general characteristics of international investment law, we can say that this is a specialized field, specialized area of international law, which operates through bilateral investment treaties, or the BITs, but we also find investment provisions in agreements that have plurilateral character, like the Energy Charter Treaty that I'm going to comment on in more detail later on. And finally, we also do have comprehensive agreements, for instance, trade agreements that also include investment chapters, that they have investment provisions as part of their overall scope. And historically, international investment law has been created or established in order to secure the protection of investments. So this has been the explicit aim of the investment treaties, and this has also resulted, like this historical embedment of IIL in this orientation as protection of investments. It has resulted in what we nowadays call the asymmetry or asymmetrical character of the discipline, with the focus being on the investors and the investors' rights, rather than on what they could be obliged to do or on the rights of the host states. So the asymmetrical character can be seen both in the substantive part of international investment law, because this area generally regulates obligations of host states in relation to investments, but it very rarely includes obligations of the investors, and if it does, then they are provided in a quite limited manner. So I'm going also expand on that later on. And the asymmetrical character of IIL can also be seen in the procedural side. In ISDS, in investor-state dispute settlement, which is generally handled nowadays by the means of international investment arbitration, it is basically the investors that can challenge the states. It's the investors that can initiate the proceedings against the host state. So that's something to bear in mind. While, of course, the international treaties are concluded between the states. So if we have a bilateral investment treaty, it is the two countries that see the bond and see the future for the companies of one of them investing in the other and providing proper conditions for that. So the parties to international agreements are naturally the states. The parties to the actual relations that are the object of regulation here happen between the investors that are engaged in the actual investment venture with the host state on the other side. So this is the composition of the procedural parties when it comes to the dispute and when the dispute is resolved by the means of investor-state arbitration. And historically, international investment law has been characterized as composed of agreements that were concluded between the global North states and the global South states. So the typical combination of the parties to the treaty would be North-South. When I was having the course in international investment law as a student, it was still taught in this manner. So when we were speaking about the historical developments and at that time, like recent trends, it was in a sense natural that we have this the investors coming from the north in order to take advantage of the accessibility of resources of different kind while placing their investment in the host country belonging typically to the global south. And at the same time, seeking the guarantees, seeking protection against such actions like arbitrary expropriation that could happen due to political action or unforeseen circumstances. And having the certainty that if such an event takes place, then on the basis of the treaty, there will be a possibility of claiming compensation. But this is not the not all that is to the development of international investment law. And right now, I would like to take a look with you at the chart, at the figure that has been drawn from the UNCTAD World Investment Reports, the 2015 edition that was actually focused on the changes in the international investment governance. And this is a chart that illustrates how IIL evolved over time. So we can see different eras or different phases of its modern evolution. And I would also like to emphasize that the chart is not complete. It's not complete on the left side because actually the roots of IIL are older, so they reach to the past colonial era. Starting the chart with the 1950s means that we basically aim at the description characterization of the modern day investment law. And then it's also incomplete on the right side. So it's a chart that ends with the data from 2015. This is actually important when we take a look at the numbers that we have in the at the top of each of the columns. So as we can see, back in the 1950s and 1960s, we had just 37 investment treaties, and we had the ravishing number of 0 ISDS cases filed in the period. And then the following era of dichotomy, so 1965 until 1989, brought proliferation of the investment treaties. So we see that there's been 367 agreements in operation at the time, but ISDS has not been very intensively used. And this has changed in the following period. So what is characterized here as the era of proliferation connected with the economic liberalization and globalization processes has brought a huge increase in the numbers of the treaties. And it has also brought about the start of intensive increased use of ISDS mechanisms. So suddenly the investors have discovered that they can bring the states before the arbitral tribunals, and they have been using it extensively. And then we have those numbers further increased, further accumulating in the era of reorientation. So this is what UNCTAD has labeled the times after 2008. So after the financial crisis and after the public opinion, after the governments, and after the arbitration and investment law practitioners have also started reconceptualizing the field, and including to a higher extent the developmental elements into it, and elements that are related to sustainability, but also to the greater transparency and greater openness of the system of dispute resolution. So if we were to ask what happened afterwards, so what trends in when it comes to global investment flows, but also when it comes to drafting the investment treaties, we could observe after 2015, so in the years that are the most recent ones, we could see that when it comes to the FDI trends, I guess we all remember those phenomena of rising protectionism, both in trade and in investment, that have resulted in actually many events and that have brought many far-reaching consequences for the global capital flows and transactions and investment operations, including, for instance, the China-US trade wars. We have also seen the slowdown in in reaching out when it comes to global levels of FDI, and then in 2019, and in particular in 2020, we have faced the COVID-19 crisis, and in 2020, UNCTAD provided this comment in their global investment report that 2020 was the year of a dramatic fall in FDI. So it has fallen by 40% in comparison with the levels from 2019. So those phenomena already preceding the COVID-19 pandemic, but then accelerated by it, have resulted in increased competition for the investments. So this has different consequences. It might mean, for instance, that it may be more difficult to expect more from the investors if we actually have to do much more in order to attract them. But this is not the only trend that we have observed. So recent years have brought basically the end to this traditional north-south divide when it comes to the compositions of the parties to investment treaties. So we have north-north and south-south agreements. And we have also seen more and more of the commitments included in the investment treaties that explicitly refer to the SDGs, to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it is definitely a trend, but there is a question to what extent this trend leads to effective legal protection, to what extent those SDG commitments genuinely have teeth. Another important thing that happened over the past years, so in this period characterized by UNCTAD as the one of redefinition, or searching this new identity of the IIL, has been the public legitimacy crisis of the of investment law and also of the ISDS, of the investor-state dispute settlement. So that's something that you are probably familiar with, the popular imagery that was that has been present in the media and in many discussions when it comes to international investments, has not been very favorable. So this has brought about the problem of the need for enhancing the safeguards of representation of public interest in international investment law, of addressing the procedural issues such as deficits of transparency, the questions about securing adjudicatory independence. And we have quite abundant literature on this topic. Both those streams of criticisms have met in what we are witnessing right now as the reform of ISDS, and this has reached the multilateral forum. So over the past over 2 years, the Ancestral Working Group 3 has been working on the ISDS reform, including the proposals such as introduction of the multilateral investment court that has been forwarded by the and heavily promoted by the European Union, or at least introduction of an appellate mechanism when it comes to awards that are issued by the investment tribunals. So there is definitely a transformative potential in every crisis. So this also raises the question, how is the potential being used? So what is really happening? How much can be done in order to depart from this picture that is all about the money and turn or make international investment law into an instrument that allows us or help us to face the major challenges of the day, including that of climate change and including that of energy transformation. So right now I would like to take a look at the status quo. So I would like to consider whether in the present architecture of IIL, we do have tools in order to seek the protection of environmental common goods, particularly in the context of the green energy transition. Well, we can say that we have some instruments at hand here, and we can roughly divide them into procedural ones and that of substantive law. And in the area of procedural law, there's been definitely a big movement towards introducing explicit transparency and participation safeguards in recent years, including such developments as the introduction of the ancestral transparency rules that are used in international investment arbitration, as the reforms of the rules, procedural rules of ICSID, and we also see it in a number of specific rules of procedure that are used by arbitral institutions. We also have enhanced transparency and participatory standards present in the investment agreement. So in the new wave investment agreements concluded by the European Union, for instance, those elements are very strongly pronounced. When it comes to specific procedural instruments that can be used in order to mobilize the investors, or in order to increase expectations of public interest protection, by the investors, a talk of the day, or not only this day, but over the past few years, actually, it has been a very, very hot topic. That's that of counterclaims. So availability of counterclaims in investment arbitration has been long postulated, and while the rules of procedure and the actual bilateral investment treaties allow for that to a different extent, there has been definitely a trend in case law. So investment tribunals have been more willingly, increasingly embracing counterclaims and actually seeking seeking quite proactively the possibility of using them, allowing for them. And finally, I just would like to make a little reservation here. I am aware of the fact that the classification of alternative remedies, or generally the problem of remedies, as the issue of procedural law might raise a discussion. But for the purposes of this presentation, I thought that it will allow for clarity to classify them here due to their importance for the actual arbitral process. So the thing is that for redressing the damage caused by the investors, for instance, in regard to the natural environment, it has been stated that it might be advisable to allow not only for the compensatory liability, but also to allow for remedies in kind, for instance, revitalization of the terrain that has been negatively affected by the conduct of the investment. So, for instance, if we have a mine that has been operating and led to severe pollution, then it might be treated as a remedy in kind, as an alternative remedy, ordering the investor to redress the damage, to restore the environment to its original state. And then when it comes to the existing substantive law instruments, the main one that has also been widely commented upon and increasingly used in actual bilateral treaties is the right to regulate clause. So pronounced declaration of the state's right to regulate, to introduce the laws oriented at the protection of public interest. So this instrument has been used in the treaties in order to counterbalance the investors' rights, in particular the right to fair and equitable treatment. And then we have the point that actually tackles a very delicate issue. There is a question of whether we can speak of substantive investor obligations under the currently existing investment treaties. Well, the answer is it's complicated. It's actually quite nuanced. What the treaty drafters are doing. So what is relatively popular, or what is relatively well known, is the investor's obligation of initial compliance with the laws of the host state. So including the environmental regulations and of course the energy market or energy sector regulations of the host state. Initial compliance means that the investment has to be in accord, it has to follow the standards provided by the host state's law at the moment of establishment of the investment. But that's initial compliance, and many of the problems, of course, arise while the investment is already in operation. And here the problems start. So in the old school investment treaties, we generally didn't go into that direction. There was not much about it, to say the least. The recent years have brought, as already mentioned, the proliferation of the SDG-related commitments or responsible business conduct commitments, The problem with them, the problem with those clauses, is that very frequently they take the form of soft commitments. So they are recommendations rather than enforceable investor obligations. So that means that the lack of compliance will not really be met with the actual sanction. And then we have very rare occurrences of obligations of continuous compliance. So in some investment treaties, but very, very few at present, the parties, the states, decided to introduce this obligation of the investor to comply within the investment with the laws of the host state on an ongoing basis. So there is some case law on this issue, like Alvarez versus Indonesia, but then again, this has only been possible because of the explicit clause in the investment treaty. That was the OIC investment treaty in this case that simply specifically stipulated that the investor has to comply with the laws of the host state throughout the existence of the investment. So if we were to sum up this quick overview that we have on the trunk of our tree of the already existing instruments embedded, included in the IIL that can be used for the protection of environmental common goods, the list is not very long. It is also not the very, like we have different types of instruments mentioned here, but it doesn't mean that they are commonly included in the actual treaties. So in the more recent generation, we have the stance taken by the parties towards opening the system or towards stronger protection of public interest, but this is by no means the rule. So if you still remember the chart that we looked at the beginning, that was illustrating the increase or accumulation of investment treaties over the years, then it's easy to actually realize that we have those hundreds or thousands of treaties around the world, and only few of them, actually the ones from the most recent generation, include those types of provisions in a more pronounced or more explicit manner. So this has been addressed to some extent by the practice of investment tribunals that, as already mentioned, have been adopting more expansive interpretations of the investment treaties. But this might not be enough considering the challenges that we're facing nowadays. So if we now can move towards the green transition part of our today's talk, and if we are to consider whether this entire structure, regulatory framework of investment law that we have in place is appropriate, is adequate for supporting the green transition, I think we might start scratching our heads a little bit, because if we think about the international efforts towards making the green transition effective, towards making it happening, we can start with the European Green Deal. This is, of course, a plan that is aimed to a large extent at the intra-EU market, at the intra-EU energy sector, and it will, of course, bring about a massive transformation thereof in the upcoming years. The transformation has already started, but it will definitely grow in the years to come. But part of the EU policy is also the promotion of the international promotion and of the Green Deal, not only in terms of declaratory statements, but also in terms of standards to be included in the relations of the EU as an actor to international dealings and in the context of internationally undertaken commitments. So I couldn't, of course, I couldn't help including a little Danish accent here, but it is, of course, affecting very strongly the Danish energy sector as well, in terms of the wind power. And then we have the United States recently returning to the table. So as we all remember, the President Trump's administration was very reluctant to say the least, to join the coalition of the countries that were willing or interested in making commitments. The issue of withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement is a well-known and well-discussed fact. And now we can see the United States returning to the table. We will see how it's going to develop, but definitely the President Biden's initiative of organizing the Leaders Summit on Climate, which took place very, very recently, just a few days ago, is definitely a strong indicator for that. His very immediate declaration of the United States return to the Paris Agreement is another very important international signal regarding the US priorities. And then we have China, like another key player in the field. And when it comes to China, it has somewhat mixed record in this regard. So we have the formal commitments made by President Xi Jinping last year regarding the reduction of emissions and achieving the carbon neutrality by China by the year 2060. And also there's been like this intermediate commitment of China aiming at reaching the peak of its emissions by 2030 and then phasing it out. It is actually interesting because Xi Jinping is he studied chemical engineering, and its ecology has been like very in the area of his interests from very early on. So it's been present in his policies quite early. China is well known as the home state of many of the technological developments related to the green transition. It's the largest manufacturer of electric cars in the world. It has booming solar panel industry. But on the other hand, it is actually still heavily reliant on fossil fuels. And about 10, 12 years ago, the discussion about its flagship Belt and Road Initiative, so this massive plan of investments spread over 3 continents, was very much a debate about how the Belt and Road Initiative should secure China's stability in terms of energy supplies. So for this huge and very quickly developing economy, energetic stability was one of the key objectives. So definitely the commitments related to the green transition changed the picture, but nevertheless, we still have the Belt and Road Initiative in operation. And what we can see on the map right now is what you probably are familiar with. So these are the veins or the routes of the land and the landlocked and the maritime route under the Belt and Road Initiative. So these are those 2 blue networks that we can see there, spreading throughout Asia, Africa, and Europe. A relatively new line is the red one that is actually also related to the climate change problems and issues, and making, in a sense, like use of it in a commercial manner. Because melting of the ice caps and the rise of the sea waters will actually allow for the northern maritime route to be in operation for much longer periods during the year. This is not only the object of interest of China, but it's also the object of interest of many other trading nations that would like to possibly make use of the accessibility of the maritime routes for commercial purposes. So trade-wise, this is in a sense like new opening. When it comes to its environmental impact, much has been written about it already. I'm sure that within this group, it's a very well-known problem that there is a big debate about how for instance, the exhaust from the engines of those big commercial vessels that are the cargo ships might affect the stability of the Arctic ecosystems that have been that will be already affected by the fact of the global warming. So what's going to happen further? At the multilateral forum, we will have soon an occasion to find out. So we have the upcoming United Nations Climate Change Conference in November 2021. And this will also be the opportunity for other countries, other players to formulate their stances and bring up their agenda to the table. And another forum where the debate is also ongoing is that of Energy Charter Treaty and the International Energy Charter as the organization. And this is basically an international organization, a plurilateral forum with at present 53 signatories and contracting parties, including the EU and including the most of the EU member states. The treaty itself is a product or an outcome of the investment policies of the 1990s. It has 4 main goals, but first and foremost, it's oriented at it's an investment treaty. It's oriented at the protection of investments in the energy sector, and it is binding among the signatories. And at the footsteps of the international investment law reform, both when it comes to the procedural issues, where we have this debate about how the existing ISDS system based on arbitration should be replaced or supplemented by additional mechanisms, how its public legitimacy should be increased, as well as when it comes to the substantive content of investment treaties in order to strengthen the protection of public interest and environmental common goods. As a result, we have those issues, we have those points of interest reflected in the currently ongoing process of renegotiation of the Energy Charter Treaty. So many of the signatories have stated that perhaps the Energy Charter Treaty, the product of the 1990s philosophy of investment lawmaking, is not entirely adequate to the challenges of the day. And the negotiations are ongoing. They are not very likely to end soon, but we do have on the table the published EU's proposal that has been issued in, disclosed in May 2020, which includes both procedural suggestions or procedural formulation of procedural provisions for the reform treaty that are largely aimed at acceptance of the investment court formula. As already mentioned, this features very prominently on the EU's agenda in the currently concluded treaties, as well as at the multilateral forum at the UNCITRAL. But also in terms of substantive standards, the European Commission has brought about proposals aimed at reorienting the Energy Charter Treaty towards making it more green, towards making it more friendly for sustainable energy and renewable energy sources. So parts of the proposal include the obligation of the impact assessment that would be necessary in order to obtain the authorization for the investment. It also includes explicit references to the Paris Agreement, to the clean energy transition, to the existing multilateral environmental agreements, and to CSR. So corporate social responsibility, in terms of business conduct standards to be adopted by the investors if they operate under the treaty's provisions. The problem with the substantive standards in the EU's proposal is that they are basically soft standards. So we don't see them as fully enforceable obligations. So they're more like again, good practices recommendations. That raises a question that also made the critics of the proposal within the EU not entirely satisfied with that. So the critics were saying that if already at the level of the proposal, we, in a sense, like cut it down, we do not formulate more far-reaching postulates, then once it's obvious that in the process of negotiations it will be further modified and not accepted in a full manner, it means that maybe we're like censoring ourselves too much. An important question was asked during the parliamentary debate in the EU Parliament in October 2020, where it was explicitly asked, why shall we keep the ECT, and or why shall we stay as a why should EU stay as a party to the ECT if remaining within the confines of the treaty would basically mean protecting investments in fossil fuels and going in this manner explicitly against the EU's policies aimed at the green transition. So that would mean that we, in a sense, like extend the protection, give a, not just a grace period, but as long as the EU stays within the Energy Charter Treaty, it will keep extending the protection under the provisions of this rather traditionally oriented instrument. And the answer that was issued by the Commission was very interesting. So there's been a written answer, and the part of the answer was the information that new points were added to the proposal. So those points from May 2020 were actually extended later on. Those points have not been published because the Commission stated that it's still consulting it with the member states. But they include the postulate of the gradual phase out of protection when it comes to the fossil fuels based investments, or like traditional non-renewable energy sources. And there was also an answer to the question, like, why on earth would this radical question, why would the EU choose to stay in the Energy Charter Treaty if it would go against its own Green Deal policies? And the answer was kind of like realpolitik one. The answer stated that if the EU leaves the ECT, it will trigger the 20-year sunset clause. So it would mean that it doesn't mean leaving overnight and cutting the ties. It means that for the next 20 years, the EU and if the member states would be leaving, they would also be facing the claims that are based on the Energy Charter Treaty as we have it right now. So the argumentation of the Commission was basically, it's better to stay and at least try to reform the existing ECT. If it doesn't work, well, we still can leave. It just means that the consequences will not happen immediately. For 20 years. We will still be obligated to honor the obligations under the ECT. And an interesting thing to notice is the membership of the ECT. So we have the, so while we have the United States and China as the big absentees of the charter, China has been a keen observer of it. Also because among the members of the ECT, we have a number of the Central Asian countries, which have been the recipients of the Chinese investments under the Belt and Road Initiative, and which have been also perceived in this like original version of the Belt and Road plans as the sources of energy supplies in this traditional manner to the Chinese economy. So those members of the ECT are quite likely to be very reluctant regarding the potential for the reform. But of course, the results of the negotiations remain to be seen. So the fourth round of the negotiations has ended in March, but of course, this is not the last that we are going to see of it, and there will be many more rounds to come, quite likely. And now, if I could very briefly move to the issue of investor obligations in this context. As already mentioned, the problem with the currently existing regulatory framework for IAL is that the investor obligations very exceptionally go beyond the duty of initial compliance, and they generally do, if they do, then they take the form of soft commitments, so they do not have enforceable character. So securing those two points when it comes to postulates de lege ferenda in regard to future treaty drafting is very commonly indicated. And when it comes to specifically to the Energy Charter Treaty and how the issue of investor obligations could be possibly handled here, there's been such points raised. Like if we were conceptualizing a bigger, more ambitious proposal, there's been several points raised here. One of them was the introduction of the clear distinction between two types of investments. So the low carbon ones that we would be ideally seeking to protect, and the carbon intensive ones where the protection, well, the extension or granting the protection under the ECT would be much more problematic. And it seems that this point has actually been addressed by this addition or annex to the EU's proposal mentioned in the answer of the Commission from October 2020. It seems that this brief information about the phase out that is planned might refer to this form of distinction of between the investments. Then another point that was raised was that the ECT could use the mechanism that we know from the Paris Agreement, so adopting the nationally determined contributions, so this bottom-up approach, and allowing the signatories to actually make the declarations on this regard, but then it would be possible to hold them publicly accountable for the fulfillment of those declarations. Another points include the clean hands clause for the ISDS access. So like a clean record of the investor in regard to SDGs and responsible business conduct standards in order to enjoy the protection under the ISDS mechanism of the Energy Charter Treaty. And formulating an explicit carve-out for climate response measures under the ISDS. That's another proposal. probably quite difficult to achieve in the renegotiation process. And to conclude the part about investor obligations, it has been so debated over the past years that in order to fulfill all those different public interest-oriented goals, it would be a very apt instrument. Nevertheless, it would require changing a massive amount of treaties. I've been actually wondering whether we can speak of any experience with having substantive investor obligations when it comes to international investments. And the answer came from a different field, so not from investment treaties, but actually from what Julian Chess and Georgios Dimitropoulos characterize as unilateral international economic law, and that's the regulatory framework for special economic zones. So here we have laws that are created by the state, so it's national laws, but laws oriented at the investors, usually foreign investors within the specific geographical area. And this is the field that has a very long tradition of substantive investor obligations. And I had an occasion recently, together with my colleague and research partner, Guo Rui from Renmin University, to work on that. So we've done a comparative study of special economic zones in two zones in China, so Shenzhen and Hainan. Hainan is a Chinese SAS that is oriented at environmental protection. It has quite a unique ecosystem. It's dubbed as Chinese Hawaii. Shenzhen is this Chinese Silicon Valley, one of the paragons of the success of special economic zones as developmental instruments. And we are also looking at the later generations of the SASs. So we checked the performance indexes of special economic zones in Tanzania and in Poland. And we were matching the outcomes of this study. So we're checking it over time. We adopted the historical perspective here in order to match the changes in regulation of the laws within the zone, in particular in regard to investor obligations, with the standards of performance. And what we have observed was that somewhat contrary to the claim of UNCTAD that says that it's in the new wave of the special economic zones when we see the proliferation of environmental goals in reference to the United Nations SDGs. It's not fully the case. So yes, of course, we see naturally the explicit references to SDGs after they were introduced in 2015, but it doesn't mean that the standards of environmental protection and investor obligations in this regard didn't exist before. Actually, we found that they have turned out to be much more efficient and much stronger in the older zones than in the most recent ones. So for instance, in Tanzania, the references to the SDG goals took the form of the soft commitments, responsible business conduct standards. And naturally, they were not necessarily more efficient than the ones coming from the old and middle generation. So to conclude, if you were to think about this experience or this knowledge in the context of formulating the investor obligations for the investment treaties, again, the efficiency of the soft commitments is controversial. So we risk greening the treaty without genuinely making the change. So that's definitely an aspect to be taken into account in the future plan. And these are the challenges that the international investment law faces. What solutions, in which direction it is going to turn, we're definitely going to witness it in the years to come. And right now, I'm very sorry for speaking for so long. So I believe the time that does not really allow for saying too much about the SHIELD, the research group that I have the pleasure of leading. So I just would like to mention that we're very much oriented at the study of the trade, investment, and commercial relations in the context of intersections between economic and non-economic values, such as environment, sustainability, health and cultural heritage. And I would like to invite you warmly to check us out and to see what we're doing. You can see us at the website of University of Copenhagen, but we are also on Twitter. So there is a lot of action coming from SHIELD on Twitter. We are also on LinkedIn. And when it comes to our different events, both past and those that are to come, you can see that we have a lot of things happening and about to happen. The ones that are specifically related to sustainability and environmental protection are marked in bold here. So for all the interested persons, we'll be happy to keep you updated. If you have time, take a look at Twitter, take a look at our website. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions to come.
Thank you very much, Professor Lam, for the lecture. It was not only most informative, but also beautifully done. I mean, the presentation, I found it fascinating, and I don't think it was only my feeling. Now I'll open the discussion indeed, and I'll accept questions from three sources. Most easily, you may just switch on your mic and then ask your questions here. Or you may type your question in the chat of the Zoom, and then I read it aloud and allow Professor Lam to answer. Or those of you who are following us on Facebook may just put their questions into comments, and then again I read them aloud and ask Professor Lam to answer them. Because as you may have seen, after small turbulences, we managed to be live on Facebook, so everything is all right. I only warn you that everything is recorded, so if anybody feels uncomfortable with that, be aware of that. So I welcome you, and I open the discussion.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Cezary Błaszczyk. I am also a member of our research group. Thank you, Professor, for this insightful and interesting lecture. My question, I hope it is not too much off the topic because it connects to the lecture. My question is, what, in your opinion, is the dividing line between capitalist greenwashing and making capitalism green? Thank you.
Please switch on your mic.
I'm sorry. Should I answer immediately?
I think that may be most convenient because the questions are surely coming from different angles. As we see from this question, it was quite surprising. So maybe it will be most convenient because they are not necessarily on the same subject, if you please.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think it's as excellent as it is extremely difficult. So the difference between getting genuinely green and greenwashing. Well, I believe for me, at the very intuitively, it would be the issue of effectiveness and actual change that is being brought about. The study of I think that when it comes to greenwashing or sustainable development goals or labels such as green transition, for instance, I think that there is a great value in the fact that we pay so much attention to them, but there is also a risk in using them, which is the fact that just the names dropping will already solve the problem. And I think that this is one of the realizations that that I had when I was working on this special economic zones project with Guo. The results of this study are going to be published very soon in Journal for International Economic Law. Something that we have noticed has been that the sole use of the labels does not mean that way is given to effective or to effective obligations. And we would rather see no labels, but genuine liability of the investors for environmental damage, rather than necessarily placing it under the category of, SDG box ticked, and now we don't have to think about it any longer. It seems that, to me, greenwashing relies quite specifically in using the labels without bringing about the genuine change. But this is only I realize that this is a very general answer, but this is also a matter for a very broad discussion. And I would be happy to undertake such a discussion when it comes to looking at the specific provisions of the law. Like as an investment lawyer, I would be happy to take a look at the particular acts and simply check it against this master of enforceability of obligations, liability of the investors. What can actually be done if the standards are not being met? I think that will be the crucial element to me. Effectiveness.
Okay, thank you very much. I realize the question was difficult, but it is also very interesting, and I think that we really need to talk about this issue when discussing proposals for new legislations. And from your answer, I gather that the conclusion is that we can only speak in those general terms unless we analyze the specific provisions, and not only we analyze them in their legal aspects, but also we need to analyze their economic and ecological results, right?
Yes, but I would also say that from my point of view, so when it comes to treaty design and when it comes to the regulatory framework, what I would care about is less. If we want to reach the genuinely green goals, then I think that putting the emphasis on the efficiency of the commitments and on the enforceability of the commitments would be critical. I think that it's nice to have all those soft, responsible business conduct declarations. I acknowledge that there might be a value in spreading the word and spreading the knowledge, and that suddenly it looks bad when you don't have any kind of reference to it in the newly created treaty. But still, the issue of effectiveness of those kinds of declarations, I think it's very problematic. So that's a kind of drafting practice that yes, you use the word greenwashing, but I think it, in a sense, encourages greenwashing.
Okay.
So I'm rather skeptical about going in that direction. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I intervene now because we have a question in the chat from Dr. Pożarzyńska from the Chair of European Law, who would like to thank you for the lecture. And also she asks, what is the reason for ISDS cases rising so rapidly post-1990?
The answer is to some extent in this anecdote figure. So, so we have the period of proliferation of the treaties, and I believe the very active use of ISDS is a result, the outcome of proliferation of the opportunities for investment and broadening the legal framework for international investments. So if we have the laws and if we have the practice, then necessarily the disputes will arise, the disputes will follow. I think that it's connected to the, in a sense, like the period of globalization as a grand unifying idea. Before we became disillusioned about it, or at least some of us have become. So I think that the issue here is that the 1990s were to some extent like the period of optimism in terms of international institutions, creating international courts, the development of the World Trade Organization. So it was also in practice the period of new countries joining the International Commercial Exchange. So after the fall of the Soviet bloc, we had suddenly like new club members, like new countries becoming or aspiring to become active parts of the global commercial exchange and active host states to the foreign investments. Then again, if we had more investments with the new host states, it also meant more potential cases. So I think that there's been economic reasons for that. There's been the issue of course, also the exponential growth of not only the Chinese economy at that period, so the 1990s and the early 2000s before it slowed down, but also other Asian countries that have become the host states for FDI. So we had new locations. We had the proliferation of global production networks. So we had also multinational enterprises locating the different like parts, slicing the production process, taking advantage of locating the stages, different stages of manufacturing in different countries. Again, this has led to more investment hosting places and more combinations of the potential parties. So that would be, I guess, my answer. A lengthy one, but it's also, again, like a very interesting and very complex question.
I invite another question. I have another question in the chat, but we may also alter between the chat and oral questions. So if anybody has a question to ask, please do. Okay, so the question from Dr. Novak, who's also extending her gratitude for a fascinating lecture, is why is that the state may make a counterclaim, but not a standalone claim against the investor?
Well, it's just the architecture of the treaties. It was generally the purpose of the investment treaties was the protection of the investment. So if a harm was done by and it was assumed that the source of the harm will be the state that will, for instance, expropriate the investor out of the investment, either directly or indirectly. And because of this purpose, because of this original or historical design of the treaties, it was assumed that if something bad happens, it will be done by the state to the investor. And then the original drafters were not, I guess, not that much concerned about possible harm that might be done in the other direction. But again, this is the historical, these are the historical reasons for why we have those asymmetries. but again, there's been like a lot of the debate about how this asymmetrical character can be counterbalanced. So some of the instruments that I mentioned earlier on are aimed actually, the function of counterclaims has been often indicated as one that could possibly bring a little bit more of balance into this procedural difference in standing of the actors.
Thank you for the answer. Also, I see Dr. Nowak is satisfied. She also extends her gratitude for the answer. And please, I mean, now we may accept another question, I think, or even two in the time frame we are left.
Hello, Professor Lam. Thank you for the lecture. I'm not, I mean, I have absolutely no background in legal studies. However, I'm extremely interested in the question of energy transition laws, etc. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the question of stranded assets? So all those assets that can probably decrease greatly in value. So do we have any protection against this decrease in value in international treaties, international legal solutions? Yeah, thank you.
It's an excellent question. It's a great question, and I'm very happy to have it brought up. Because actually the investment treaties includes this concept of indirect expropriation, which is related to the situations in which the continuation of the investment becomes impossible, not because the grounds of the investment have been like physically taken, like in classical expropriation, they are not taken forcibly by the state from the investor, but they depreciate so strongly because of the changes in the laws that the continuation of the investment becomes pointless. So there are it depends, of course, on the specific treaty, and we have like so many different treaties that it requires like the study of the specific instrument. But the institution of indirect expropriation is actually a very well established one. We have it in very widely adopted. So in those situations, if the conditions specified by the treaty are met, then the investor can claim the compensation. So there are such criteria as, for instance, legitimate expectations that the investor has to prove that they could have had for uninterrupted continuation of the investment. If they are jeopardized by the activity of the state, then it amounts to the de facto expropriation. We cannot do it anymore. So so I believe that addresses your question, and it's an excellent question because it also leads to another big problem that we have in investment law, which is that of balancing the rights of investors to have those legitimate expectations untarnished with the fact that the states should retain this basic function that they have to protect public interest. So if the changes in the law are introduced in order to, they are introduced in order to protect or secure or strengthen public interest, then the holding the state accountable for that that's one of the big problems actually discussed in investment law. So this is also the issue that is addressed by the right to regulate clauses, included more and more commonly. It's like a trend in the more recent generation investment treaties, that the states want to reserve this regulatory space as long as it's related to public interest, to make sure that they will not face the negative consequences of the investors' claims. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, and warm thanks to organizers for opening up this conference to a wider audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think we will be good with one more question. We have in the chat a question from Dr. Weber-Drzanowska. who was wondering if you have any thoughts on how the pandemic will affect foreign direct investments in the long term.
I'm very, very sorry. I had a bit of a glitch of the system, so I couldn't hear it, but I think I see it in the chat box. So maybe I'll take a second to read it. How the pandemic will affect FDI in the long term. It's the really one difficult question after another coming up. Well, of course, right now it's not just a slowdown; it's like a slippery slope going completely down. It's been saying that it was a gap year for the FDI. It's an understatement. But there are also signs of different economies bouncing back. So, for instance, China reported very recently a great increase in FDI. So their reports are highly optimistic. So there will be bouncing back, and there will be definitely we can already see those efforts of different governments in order to already prepare for the time after the pandemic, and this will also include stimulating the economies. So, well, hopefully when the pandemic is over, we will definitely see the increase. But how exactly the flows are going to go, I think we need to wait and see.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think you have time for any other question unless somebody has a very urgent one. So once more, I would like to thank you very much for coming here for a very interesting discussion and a most interesting lecture, which was really, oh, sorry, I thought it was muted. So we are very happy to have you here. We also hope to have you in Warsaw when the pandemic ends and the foreign direct investments are basically blooming, in person to listen from you maybe on another subject, because it was most interesting, and I think it will be worth continuing. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been really great. I would like to thank for all the excellent questions for this opportunity to have the discussion. I would also like to invite you very warmly to perhaps participate in or take a look at the kind of research that we're doing that is very much related to the issues of the sustainable development in the context of international economic law. I think that we have a lot in common actually when it comes to this to the research group at the Faculty of Law in Warsaw and SHIELD. Before concluding, I just would like to extend my warm thanks to my great colleagues from SHIELD, including two persons that I had seen in the room. So of course, Paweł Marcich, whom I owe a lot in terms of inspiration when it comes to all the aspects of, for instance, energy charter treaty renegotiations when it comes to the EU law problems. And I would also like to thank Alexander Szostak, another colleague who is also a SHIELD member, with whom, both with Paweł and with Alexander, we've been working together, and we had extremely inspiring discussions that are related to the ECT renegotiations and to the role of the EU as an actor to international investment relations. I'm very much indebted for that, and I'm also very much looking forward for continuing this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll
Goodbye.
close the session now. Thank you. Goodbye.